Hi, I'm Angelo John Lewis for the Sacred Inclusion Network, and I'm here with Dr. Lawrence Edwards, who, among other things, is a meditation teacher. He's an expert on Kundalini awareness, and he's the founder of something called Anamkara Meditation. And he's also written several books, two of which are The Soul's Journey and Awakening Kundalini. And he's here to talk to us about impermanence because he's going to be doing an exploration for us on the subject of impermanence on June, the third weekend on Saturday. Welcome, Dr. Edwards. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you for having me, John. It's a pleasure to be here.
I always like to start these things with a somewhat on a personal note because we're going to be talking about fairly esoteric topics. I don't think your average citizen even knows what Kundalini is, but you've done a lot of things in your life. You've been a counselor, you've been a meditation teacher. I know that you probably live in the ashram in India, for example, because we have a mutual friend. I wonder if you could share something about your personal journey and how that's connected to the concept of impermanence, maybe what you've learned, something about you.
Sure. Um, well, yes, Kundalini as a term is esoteric, and even in the yogic system, it was for many centuries sort of the most esoteric of teachings. But it really has to do with the power of consciousness, and that is deeply connected to what's been my personal experience in this life. My experience around getting connected, seeing what's beyond the ordinary mind, what's the eternal in comparison to the ephemeral, the impermanence of life. These are at the very root of our highest teachings, our deepest philosophies, our deepest spiritual experiences, the experience of mystics are really aimed at that. And my experiences began rather unusually, and I was literally 3 years old, and I woke in the night in a tremendous thunderstorm, lightning crashing. I loved thunderstorms when I was little, and there was this lady of light that I called her later, standing next to my crib because I was in a crib, looking over at me very benevolently and lovingly. And of course, as a 3-year-old, all you think of, oh, Ma. So I go, Ma. And she's just standing there looking at me, and I can see her as clear as to this day as she was. And she's just looking at me very lovingly, radiant. And she's really completely radiant. And I go, Ma, because now I'm going, what's happening here? And then I notice, even as a child, when the lightning flashes, she disappears because she's made of light. And as soon as the lightning, that's just a flash. In the darkness, she's completely radiant. And then I go, Ma. My mother comes into the room and goes, what's the matter? And I said, well, where'd the Lady of Light go? Because as soon as my real mother walked in, the Lady of Light disappeared. Well, I talked about her for years. Hmm? And it wasn't until her next appearance, um, when I was now fast forward, I had begun some practices of yoga and meditation in my late adolescence. I was very much interested in that. I had felt this presence, that image of a lady of light really captured my psyche. Um, and I wound up in the hospital, Lenox Hill Hospital in Manhattan. I was 24 years old, and they thought I had lymphosarcoma and I was going to be dead in a couple of months. They said, you won't live to see your 25th birthday. Uh, and that was a shock. That was, oh, impermanence. I had, already encountered that. You talk about that in meditative terms, but that our very existence. And as a 24-year-old, you don't think of suddenly your life is going to be ended. And it really confronted me with that. And I remember laying in the hospital bed and going, I don't know what's going on. And in some way, I just have to surrender. I just have to let go because I have no control over this. I had been at that time very much into self-effort. I had been a straight A student. I graduated magna cum laude. I had accolades. I was a mountain climber. It was a great metaphor for life. You climb to the top of a mountain, you look around, great view, go find another mountain to climb. Now I'm laying in a hospital bed, and all that willpower, all that self-effort is not changing anything. And so I offered a prayer, and that lady of light was who I had felt a presence with for for my life. I mean, from 3 years on, I summoned that memory and said, I don't know what's going on. So I just offer this all to you. And she appeared in the hospital room, radiant,
Wow.
absolutely. And I didn't know at that time what might happen, but somehow I knew it was going to be all right. And I felt this flood of love, of grace, of something coming from beyond the ephemeral, something coming from an eternal realm that is intimately connected here and now, always.
Mm.
And that connected me. And as the days in the hospital progressed and the diagnosis progressed, and finally said, oh, maybe you don't have lymphosarcoma, you have this other thing, but it's probably going to kill you later in life. And I had this feeling like, no, this is done. This is done. And sure enough, over the next few years, even that disappeared. Mm. So coming to terms and being confronted so dramatically with the very impermanence of our own existence, mm, but that it was held for me in the context of what's eternal, both in terms of the eternal power of grace of the divine, but that living experience and presence that the meditative, all traditions point to as our inherent nature.
Mm.
That's where we find the true refuge. So that's how I, was launched into this lifelong pursuit of the eternal.
I mean, it sounds like it was implanted from a very early age.
Yeah,
Not everyone is, maybe many of us have experiences like that, but few people are so conscious of it.
yeah. And my brothers and my sister, my mother, father, they used to ask me about the Lady of Light because I would not. They thought it was just, oh, it was a dream. I said, no, no, no. Even as a 3 year, I knew, I was absolutely certain. And she made more appearances, but we'll move on with our interview on
No,
this.
uh, well, it's interesting you talk about the sort of the imminence of death because
Hmm.
that's when people start thinking about this is not going to end. This is going to end, and this body is not going to last forever.
Right,
That's when, and even people that I know that are involved in Buddhism, it's like they get older, they start thinking about these kind of things.
right.
But from talking to you earlier, I get the sense that it's important to have an understanding that impermanence is not just about death. It's something, in some sense, it's fundamental to our understanding of life itself.
Oh, yeah.
Is that an overstatement or?
No, no. I mean, so I mean, especially the Eastern traditions focus on this, but by no means only that. I mean, in as a clinical, therapist and doing clinical psychology for decades, um, the mind tries to hold on to things. It gets attached, projects them that the good things are gonna go indefinitely into the future, and if we're in a bad state, we think the bad things gonna keep going into the future. Um, and so that sense that the mind carries this false notion of impermanence um, around actually things are going to last. So it doesn't understand everything's impermanent, everything's in flux. Even the things you cling to and want and like are not going to stay around. It was part of the, Buddha when he was first talking about these things and had practiced yoga and was a part of those philosophies to begin with. So we're talking 2,500, 3,000 years ago, humanity was still grappling with these same things and talking about them and saying that, yes, the mind gets attached and then thinks things are permanent. It's attached to life. It thinks the body is going to continue. It gets attached to a role. It thinks that's going to continue. It gets attached to a relationship. That's going to continue. Um, but the reality is no, these things are all in flux, and we are even psychologically most healthy when we're in, well, we could call it a flow state. Mm. And a flow state means we're moving with the dance of impermanence, that things are moving, shifting, changing, relationships, politics, economics, all these things, that we come into relationship with that change and we move through that and we can become masterful at dealing with the impermanence. But in order to gain that mastery, we have to let go of attachment to permanence and
Mm.
thinking that things are going to last, things are going to stay the same, they're going to be good. I can make it stay the same. Um, and you can see this, even in terms of ordinary maturation. Well, if a child doesn't let go of their being a child, they don't grow into an adolescent. If an adolescent doesn't let go of being an adolescent, they don't become a mature adult. All our phases of development all have to do with how do we let go of, how do we die to the past
Mm.
that's past? Because if we're clinging to it, then part of our attention, our experience, and everything isn't present, isn't here and now. We've
Mm.
disempowered ourselves. So understanding impermanence and understanding that, oh, this is part of the flow of life. That's why, we have so many different rituals for marking stages of development. You graduate from elementary school into middle school, you do these things. There are anniversaries, there we celebrate birthdays. Birthdays is always about change. Another
Mm.
year passed by, another circle around the sun. So they're both going on, and we see how the mind is because it's attracted to things and wants to cling to them and hold them steady and believe they're going to continue, and that its happiness is contingent on that. Mm.
Mm.
So ordinary experience, the ordinary mind, its states are all conditioned, and the mind tries to sort of manipulate the universe to meet its conditions for having happiness. That's a very different and impossible task to do compared to what the mystics, the meditating masters, and everything found as our root nature.
Mm.
Mm, that exists beyond the flux of mind states of happiness, sadness, all those things. There's an eternality about a sense of being that we can come to know that gives us the steadiness to meet all the changes that are going to unfold. Otherwise, we're going to be caught up in regressive states. We can make fun of them. We can make fiction out of Peter Pan. I won't grow up. I don't want to go to school. I mean, this is part of human existence and experience. Uh, but so is going beyond that and getting free of that.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about the nature of the mind. It seems that there's something human wanting to just sort of cling to things as they are. It's enormously threatening to think that this life, this place where I am right now, is not going to last, especially if things are going well.
Right.
We want it to continue forever, and we will do anything to maintain that, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm wondering, you studied a lot of different traditions, and my sense, and I may be wrong, that the Western tradition doesn't really not talk about impermanence as as directly as, for example, Buddhism and for that matter, Hinduism. Maybe
Right.
you could give me some idea as to how other traditions approach this subject.
Yeah. Well, the Hindu Buddhist traditions, because Buddhism grew out of Hinduism.
Yes.
Now, Buddhism is to Hinduism as Protestantism is to Catholicism, so to speak. Um, and so they share a common root. And that root understanding was, articulated in the Upanishads going back 4,000 years pre-Buddha. I mean, Buddha would have studied Upanishadic truths, and he studied in Samkhya, a yogic system of Patanjali, later codified by Patanjali. And so the understanding and the insight into the nature of the mind and the really profound psychology that the yogis and Buddhists had developed. I mean, they were literally thousands of years ahead of Western psychology. They were talking about conditioning and the conditioned mind, which didn't show up in Western psychology until the 20th century. They were talking about that 3,000 years ago.
Mm.
So they really looked at what shapes consciousness. And what they were looking at was from a standpoint of, well, if you can shift your consciousness out of soul identification with the mind and body, these ephemeral instruments, you can actually discover that there's a boundless field of consciousness. And that boundless field of consciousness is the ground of our being. And that's what is eternal consciousness, not mind, which is ephemeral, not body, which is ephemeral, but what illuminates them and gives them their existence. That's what the eternal is. So the yogis and the Buddhas said, oh, our seeking for the eternal, for things that are going to last, there's wisdom in that. The seeking has wisdom in it. We're just looking in the wrong place.
Mm.
We're seeking to make material conditions stay the same because my happiness was contingent upon having this comfort, having this pleasure, having this thing all lined up, having them lined up so I can see them lined up for a while and make sure that I feel secure that, yes, the next one's coming. Even I know this one's going, but the next one's gone. That's what we think mastery is. And the yogis are going, no, that's not what it's about. Then you're just repeatedly immersed in the conditioned response of the mind, constantly seeking the next pleasure and trying to avoid the next pain.
Mm.
That is conditioning your entire existence. But because there have been sort of the explorers, not exploring the landscape in different continents, but the ones exploring this inner domain of consciousness, they went, there's a way to go beyond all that, and then discover that there's this boundlessness to this quality of consciousness. And it's why Buddha talked about it as the four immeasurables. And the four immeasurables have to do with, what's the infinite nature of our infinite being? They're called four immeasurables only because the mind divides things up into fours or threes or whatever. It divides things. The mind is an instrument for experiencing this level of reality, which is divided into parts, self and others, objects and this and that, right? You go into unity consciousness, it's suffused with these qualities. It's one quality, but the mind can only grasp differences. But the boundless wisdom, that's an aspect of it. The boundless loving kindness, right? The boundless rapturous joy, the boundless unshakable equanimity, peace, the peace that surpasses understanding. All mystics, when they enter that field, we can call it God, we can call it goddess, we can call it bodhicitta, you can give all names that the mind might call it, but this is beyond all names. This is the eternal. This is that presence. And so the mystics would say that longing to have things remain and stay with that joy, with that peace, that's really longing to know the true nature of who you are and what underlies this entire universe, because that's the only place it can be found. Everything else is in flux. Everything you look around, there's nothing that isn't changing.
Now, you've dealt with a lot of different people as a psychologist, also as a spiritual teacher. I wonder if you could give me some illustrations as to how maybe you have helped people deal with come to grips with the changeless nature of life. Let's call it.
Well, sometimes it's interesting. Well, one example comes to mind, especially because I was teaching as a volunteer. I decided to go into federal and state penitentiaries because I thought, who needs this more than anybody, probably? I mean, we all live in our prisons, but these fellows, it was male federal penitentiaries, they were really imprisoned. and they've been imprisoned by their entire conditioning of their life. The way they grew up, the conflicts they've lived through, who they were told they were, all these things bound them. That seemed permanent. Mm. So I started volunteering at a federal penitentiary, going in weekly on a Sunday evening to teach meditation to groups of guys who would just show up. So one fellow started coming after for a while, and in prisons there's a really antagonistic dynamic between inmates and the guards. The guards don't like him. They treated me and the prison, even the inmates who were coming to this meditation program, they needled us. They gave us the worst room. They gave us a room with the old cans of soda dispensing machine in the back of the room that would go clunk, clunk, clunk. And the guards would make a point to come in during meditation, throw in their quarters, and have the cans come tumbling down just to disturb us. I mean, that was that dynamic. So one night we're doing our practices and we're using mantras that I teach that are really potent, especially in the Kundalini system, for helping to invoke this sense of awareness. And just help calm the body, calm the mind, do a little slower, deeper breathing, get out of the permanent sense of this is just who I am and I'm stuck with it. Because that's part of what we think is permanent. I am who I am and I'm stuck with it. That's the way it is. Right. And that certainly was the experience of inmates. Life didn't change, their life didn't change, and they were going to be in there for years, decades, some for life sentence. So this one night we're sitting there and things really settled down. We did a chant, we did a meditation, very unusual in a federal penitentiary. And sure enough, one of the guards comes in, slams his quarters and everything. But very unusually, after that, he sits down in the back of the room. Now, guards and inmates do not mix. They don't do activities together. It's not touchy-feely, nothing like that. So this was really unusual. I'm going, oh, I wonder what's going on here. We're sitting there, and the meditation ends 15 minutes later or so. We chant a little bit. The guard gets up to walk out. Now, an inmate gets up and starts to follow him. Now, I had been given a heads up by the chief psychologist that this inmate had real anger problems, and I should just be aware of it. Now, I don't know what's going to happen here. We'll see. So the inmate goes after the guard, catches him as the guard's going at the door, and they have words, but calm words. I couldn't hear them, but their demeanor was okay. And I thought, okay, well, I don't know what that is. Inmate sits down. We finish up the program, and I said to him, I said to the inmate, what happened there? He said it was so strange. He said, I don't know about this chanting stuff you do, Doc, but it feels good. I don't know from Sanskrit. I don't know from Om Namah Shivaya, but it just feels good. So I go with that. And I felt very good. He said, but I had an argument with that guard in the yard today. And we really kind of got into it. And by the end of the meditation, I felt like I had to apologize. Now, inmates don't apologize to guards. He stepped out of that entirely. Now, then he says that the guard, he said, I don't know what you guys doing here, but I came in and I felt such a wave of calm hit me. I just had to sit down.
Wow.
I just had to sit here. And then you stopped and I walked out, and they had a pleasantry. They both recognized how they contributed to what happened in the yard, and things changed. So there, the permanence was them sense of being locked into identities and roles.
Mhm.
Impermanence meant, oh, we can flow, we can change. These things can be transformed. We're not caught in that forever. And the whole dynamic between them shifted.
That's a beautiful story.
Yeah,
It's kind of like interesting because yes, prisoners they have a physical prison. So in a way,
yeah,
to some extent, that's comfortable because that is a prison.
yeah,
The rest of us are out here, and we have internal prisons that we don't see.
yeah.
So in a way, maybe that's like a positive spin on being in prison in a sense.
Right. Well, it helps us to be able to see that, oh, if an inmate can get free in prison, what's my excuse?
Mm,
right? If they can step out of their conditioning, lifelong as it may be, as potently as it's reinforced moment by moment in prison, you're the inmate, you're a piece of crap, I'm the guard. I mean, that's all the time. Yet they stepped out of it. We can step out of these conditioned patterns that imprison us. We can become aware of them, step away from them, and discover the truth of who we are.
mm. Um, a couple of questions. Uh, so we're talking about impermanence. At the
Right,
same time, on the other side of it, there's that which is doesn't change. What's the reconciliation of that? So yes, we're talking about everything is impermanent, but yet there's some sort of sense that it's boundless, that doesn't change. Or
right.
am I misunderstanding it? And maybe you can help me clarify that.
Well, they're different dimensions of our existence. The mind is also a compare and contrast, either or instrument. So the meditative traditions, in their real psychological sophistication, recognized how the mind framed things up is going to be different than what you experience when you can step out of the mind through meditative practice. And it's why meditation as a practice is critical to, well, all the different traditions for how do we get free from the mind and free from its being caught, bound in conditioned patterns, which Western psychology has really helped to delineate,
Yeah.
explore different methods for getting out of that. Everything from cognitive behavioral psychology to medications that help the mind and brain get out of stuck patterns. Um, but the Eastern traditions or the consciousness disciplines, the mystic traditions, they were looking at, well, as you open the doors of consciousness and start to discover that there's a domain of consciousness, this boundless domain, this infinitude of being, um, whether it's the Christian mystics talking about merging in God, whether it's knowing your Buddha nature or Christ consciousness, um, that's then an experience of something that is eternal, that is unchanging in its boundless nature, and gives us now an entirely different reference point for looking at all the changes that happen in body, in mind, in relationships, in the world, everything.
Mm,
And that's part of what the mystic traditions see is behind some of the seeking that we're constantly doing. Again, we're seeking for happiness, but only finding it in temporary fulfillment of desires.
mm,
They're saying, no, the rapturous joy you want, that ecstasy, oh, that's continuous in the state of the self, in the state of your Buddha nature, in the state of your Christ consciousness. And you can become so aware of that that you feel that in the background all the time. To walk in the light of knowing all the time is the goal of these traditions.
mm.
To know both the ephemeral, the limited, the bound nature of existence, our connection with all beings through that, our compassion for the suffering of all beings through our knowing it directly ourselves. But now we're also being informed by this profound truth of who we are that illumines our life, changes how we relate to those things.
So I want you to because I don't want this conversation to end without you giving some insight into you're acknowledged expert in this phenomenon of Kundalini.
Mhm.
Now, most people do not understand what the word means, and you gave an illustration about your childhood and things of that nature. But maybe just ex give me a simple explanation if there can be such a thing.
Yeah.
What does this have to do with impermanence, if anything?
Well, so that infinitude of being, that's pure consciousness, right? That creates form, inhabits it. Think
Yeah.
of consciousness like fluid. Uh, Water, you pour water into a container, it takes the shape of the container. Mm? Pour it into a different container, different shape. That's consciousness. You put consciousness into human body, it informs and experiences all that it is as a human body. Well, you could put it in an animal, you could put it in a plant, you could put it in a rock. All consciousness is giving rise to form. One aspect of that consciousness is its ability to know that and reveal it to itself as a human. That's Kundalini. It's innate to everybody. So it's seen as the power of consciousness for revelation and transformation. It reveals the true nature of who and what we are beyond mind and body, and transforms this instrument of mind and body. So it can now be congruent with that knowing, our highest knowing, that we are carriers of boundless compassion, that we see oneness, that we see there is no other, there's only ourself. We can then live in congruence with that, in accord with that, in alignment with that. That's what Kundalini does. It opens up the state of meditation. The state of meditation is the state of unity consciousness. The practices of meditation are the things we do to be able to enter the state. It might be mantra, it might be sitting in a certain way, it might be breathing in a certain way, it might be doing certain contemplations. These are all things to help refine and transform this instrument so we can come to know what's already present, the infinitude of our being. And then when that informs us, that's what then we can live out. So Kundalini is the yogic term. It's also Holy Spirit. It's the power of grace. It's the power of transformation. It's the power of revelation. It's the power of Shekinah. It's the power of a goddess, a god. These are all just human sort of archetypal names for this boundless consciousness that is innate to who we are. And that the Eastern traditions really look at the trajectory of human existence across lifetimes, that we are evolving as conscious beings across lifetimes, exploring what it is to be bound, confined, limited, not knowing, exploring all these things, seeing what it is to experience pain at the hands of others, to deliver pain, feel the remorse of that. All of these things are, are enriching to our experience, but we're lacking the fullness of being to then make it all come into service of loving kindness, of compassion, of understanding. So the power of that in the yoga system was known as Kundalini. And it's that innate power that at some point in our evolutionary process across lifetimes, it's time to wake up. It's time for us to add. We've explored all we could learn through being a finite being. We've created all the karmas, the consequences of our actions that are going to inform lifetimes to work through and learn from. But we're going to start to have this expansiveness of perspective that comes with knowing the truth of who we are and the divine nature of all other beings. We won't look on another being in the same way ever again. That's what awakening does. That's what the unfolding does. It transforms everything about our experience of reality because it adds a dimension that until then we may not have even heard of.
So I want to give you an opportunity to tell us a little bit about what you're about with your principal work, as I understand it, is this Anamkara um, Anamkara meditation practice,
Right.
making meditation, I guess, more accessible to people. Say a little bit about that, and maybe how people can learn about it, what it is,
Sure.
because when I put the words out, I have enough knowledge of sort of Hindu philosophy. I can kind of figure out what it means, but
Right.
for the average person, explain what it is that you're attempting to do.
Sure. Sure. Well, Anamkara is actually an ancient Gaelic term,
Gaelic
and
term.
it means friend of the soul.
Wow.
And John O'Donohue, who was a
Yes.
famous writer, wrote a book on Anamkara, and it came up as a way of being able to organized the notion of what our organization is about, of being a friend of the soul, and not about, hierarchy and guru sits on top of the mountain and gives out orders or anything like that. It was very, equality, equal vision, understanding. But Anamkara meditation, as an organization, is dedicated to making meditative practices freely available to everybody. So we have the Anamkara meditation YouTube channel. It has like 200 videos on it that all freely accessible. We put a weekly freely accessible e-newsletter with wisdom quotes and support for meditation practices. We do a free Thursday evening meditation program via Zoom on the first and third Thursdays of each month. This is all information that's on the Anamkara meditation website.
We'll
I'm
put
sure
some of that
you'll
information on the
put
website.
that information out. And so it's a way of being able to make the riches. I've been so blessed with unbelievable teachers, and the grace of the divine that has impacted me, and literally as far back as I can remember, and to pass that on, to give it away, to give it to all. That's the whole intent. And so that's what Anamkara meditation is about, the programs I give. And then people consult with me individually for meditation practices, for spiritual direction. Some people work with me regularly, some intermittently, some every once in a great while. It doesn't matter. Any way I can be a resource, any way I can pass on and give back what I've been given, that's all it is.
Well, we're certainly, we're privileged to have your insight and guidance in this exploration. And I just want to ask you, just in closing, something about it. We call it the Wisdom of Impermanence, Finding Stability in Change. And just to make sure I have the right date, it's June 21st, 11:30 Eastern Standard Time. What could people expect participating
Right,
in this event?
right. Well, what I want it to be is as interactive as possible.
Great.
So I want to give some, background and history, some information as a context for understanding these traditions that focus on knowing the eternal, and every mystic tradition does that. I mean, and so there are generalities that we can talk about that cross traditions. So I want to share that so we have a sort of paradigm for understanding, and we can then understand, oh, if somebody's practicing yoga, they'll talk about it this way. But if somebody's talking about Buddhism, they'll talk about it that way. It's the same thing, just different language. The Christian mystic might talk about it this way. Oh, it's the same thing, just another set of terms. So I want to give some of that, because that helps us then be able to communicate with each other without getting the ego mind gets identified with terms, dogmas, traditions, binds us, creates
Yeah.
conflicts. That's we can do without that. Um, but then go into, so how do we live this? How do we tap into that? How is what's going on in your life that this is the medicine for? Hmm? So, because those kinds of practical applications in daily life, how do we come to terms with a change that we weren't expecting? Because that's often what derails us.
Yeah.
Hmm? Loss of job, loss of relationship, loss of a loved one. It's usually the big losses, uh, though the research shows that also big gains are stressors. Um, but coming to terms with that, how do we develop resilience? How do meditative practices give us stability, steadiness, resilience? That's what it's about.
Well, I'm certainly looking forward to it. If you're watching this before it, it's on June 21st, 11:30 a.m. And if you want some more information about Dr. Edwards, he's got a number of sites, but one that I know of, it's well, why don't you just tell me what is
Well, I would say if they wanted to go to thesoulsjourney.com,
correct?
because that'll have links to the Anamkara meditation site and other site. So thesoulsjourney.com, it has connections to the YouTube channel, everything. So you'll find everything nicely centralized and accessible on thesoulsjourney.com. It also tells about, my book, The Soul's Journey, Guidance from the Divine Within, and the other book you mentioned, Awakening Kundalini, The Path to Radical Freedom. tells you more about those. And if you're interested in reviews or a link to get it, that's all there. So,
Well, I'm certainly looking forward to it. And anyway, I'm going to thank you prematurely for being our guest. And, thanks for joining me this afternoon.
yeah, my pleasure. Great talking with you.